really interesting this morning, talking about morality on Danny Philtalk's channel. A bunch of atheists in there. Danny was replaying his talk with JP, NYC, some other people. And the idea is that God is evil, perhaps. Danny didn't necessarily say this, although he kind of took that position. And he asked the question are there things that are not permissible, evil so grievous that it's not permissible? And the Christians were like, yeah. And it came back to the thing it always comes back to, which is and I don't know how to articulate it very well. They were trying to do it. Danny has a point, I think, in that we talk about things being not permissible, but God's allowed it. Is it technically true then that it's permissible? I think there's a problem with language here, and the nature of the difference between free will and determinism. Like, if you want to say, and JP was catching on to this, I think, and it's kind of like, if we don't assume a deterministic worldview and that God created agents that have the same moral capacity as he does, that's the whole point. So when there's multiple agents with a ability to impact the world, that is, you could argue that that's some kind of personal autonomy or sovereignty, but it's all subcategorized under God, so God's still ultimately the one who allows certain things or not. So you have to say it is permissible for the sake of free will. But permissible how? Like, he allows it, so he's responsible for it? To what degree? And this is where multiple agents, God's responsible for creating beings that are responsible for their own decisions. It's like adding another dimension it's like adding a third dimension to plane geometry. If you're speaking on terms of a two-dimensional structure, or like, say, the rules are laid down as plane geometry, and then you say, how many sides are there to a triangle? Oh, 3 only. Yeah, in the rules of plane geometry, a triangle has only 3 sides. But if you add a third dimension and you realize it's written on paper, what about this side, the third dimensional side, the face of it? That's a 4th side. And then if you counted the back of that, it would be a 5th side. Yeah, but the triangles are defined as, 2-dimensional objects? Yeah, you really can't make a square circle because it defines the definition. It defies the agreed upon terms in which you're operating. Thus, if God doesn't determine by his agency every act in the world, because he makes other agents in his image that have dominion over the created realm and status as having attributes of the creator himself, it's the same sort of thing. No, God's evil because it's permitted. Well, thus, are you evil because you had a kid knowing that they might do evil and then they do? Or is there evil on your head? Well, it's true. They wouldn't exist if you hadn't created them. Yeah, but God knew. So what? Don't read into the determinism into that. God knew that he would make creatures free that are able to make their own decisions. You don't know how he knows that. That is the difference. Okay, so if you're going to say, you're not saying that because God knows that therefore he determined it? Okay, because knowledge doesn't equal determinism? Okay, so then you don't believe he determined it then. Good. Oh, so you agree knowledge doesn't equal determinism. God, the only way he could know is if he determined it. That isn't the only way. Okay, good. That's the point. He's responsible for making creatures, and if he knows, and there's arguments to be made about what it means to know that, like what's going to happen. He knows what he's going to do. He knows he can probably predict what you're going to do, but not because he determined you to do it. So however he knows, we don't know how he knows. So it seems logic demands that if he determines that you only do what he decided and knew, he is responsible. Because Satan's responsible. Jesus called Satan a murderer, but he didn't kill anybody. He influenced people, and he was still a murderer. Then that means God is guilty of every murder by that standard that Jesus sets forth, unless you think Jesus was lying when he said Satan was a murderer. But Satan only influenced. You're saying God didn't just influence, he determined. It's not just the idea of influencing, that's the idea of, but of course, Satan didn't really influence anyone, did he? He just said what was determined, and what was determined was determined. See, this is why it's obviously false, determinism. Exhaustive determinism is insane and evil. That's my opinion. I'm not attacking people who believe that. In fact, I respect opinions of people that believe that more than other opinions of people who don't believe it. I even like people who believe that more than most people. But I gotta say, it's total garbage.